Hi, everybody. Did you know there's actually something going on in the background that nobody realizes and is actually the secret to how the internet and why the internet has become so wildly successful? Let's actually go back a little bit before we all had internet access. Let's go back before the internet. Let's go back before smartphones. Let's go back before email. Okay. Our primary method of communication, unless you were in the same room with somebody, was our home phones. Anybody remember home phones? Most people don't even have nowadays, but that's where we started. The funny thing about home phones is because we were tied to that particular phone, unless you had the cordless model, you had the phones with the really long cords that were all twisted up so they could expand and collapse and expand and collapse. Your sister could be in the other room talking to somebody on the phone, and privacy back then was there was a door shut and the phone cord was either shut in the door or it was under the door. Okay. Now, with home phones, remember there was like the spaces on there for like the fire and the hospital and your best friend's house and your parents' work number, right? Because with that home phone number, the only option that you ever had was to either use that rotary dial if you're really old like me, or maybe you had the push buttons, but you had to actually put that phone number in that phone or you didn't have a phone call with anybody. Well, what happens when you didn't know the person's phone number or the business's phone number, what that you needed to call? Well, there was the phone book. Okay, but there was a better service. There was something called 411. And 411 is used by a lot of people now just to say, hey, they're going to provide information, right? The term, hey, I'll give you the 411. Well, 411 was real. Why? Because it was actually 411 and later became 1411. But that's the number that you dialed. And you could give that operator a name. And that operator would return you a number or a certain number of numbers. Even when they got really advanced, they would actually connect for you at the very end of the 1411 services. So if you have a cell phone provider, they actually will still do that, but most of us don't ever use it anymore. So the internet, back to the internet now, the internet has its own version of 411. Okay? Everybody in this Zoom has already used it at least once. And I'm going to say you've probably used it hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of times already today. Hi, everybody. My name's Todd Simmons. I'm a nerd. I'm a network architect. I've been doing this for 38 years. I'm very lucky to have been able to do this all around the planet. I've done 50 plus stadiums for major sports teams, arenas, concert venues. I've even worked for foreign governments, making sure that their network worked. Most of you know a company called Facebook or Meta. I created their network. The new Apple network, the saucer, the flying saucer looking thing. Yes, I created that network. As I said, I'm very lucky. But most importantly, the network that I created that I'm most proud of was at my mama's house. Anyway, let's keep going on. What is this wildly successful internet based on? It's called DNS, or the Domain Name Service. And today, I'm going to show you why DNS is the secret of the internet. So let's go back to people. Okay. People are the users of the internet. People are the users of those phones. Okay. People are really good with names. So little demo here. Everybody put your phones down. Okay. Unless you're using it to watch the Zoom, then please keep it up. But can anybody here remember 10 phone numbers that's in their phone right now? Not the person's name, but their actual phone numbers. I bet nobody can. Maybe somebody here can do 5, but most people can only remember 3 or less phone numbers. That's it. But all of us call more than 3 different people on a regular basis. Me personally, I know my wife's phone number. I know my mama's phone number. I'm not sure what the third one is, but I'm sure there's a third one there. Those are the ones that I actually remember. Why? Why can't we remember those numbers? Because it's the way that our brains work. Our brains aren't good with a long string of numbers, but our brains are certainly good with names, right? We can remember names of so many different things that it made it easier. But computers don't use names. They love numbers, but you wouldn't know it because you don't ever actually have to put a number in. At the very beginning, when we started what was now the internet, we had something called host files. And host files were very similar to the contacts that are in your phone right now. It would have a name and then a certain amount of white space, a tab or a space or comma, delimiting this is a number, and then the actual person's name inside of our host file. So if I wanted to go to my printer, right, I could say Todd's printer, and that host file would look up the number for me and then go to my printer. But it still used a number, exactly the way that your phone is still using a number, but you're using contacts. Now, that worked really well, but the problem with that host file, just like your contacts, is it's local to your machine or to your computer. So if you went to a different computer and I typed Todd's printer, it wouldn't know where it was. The other issue with that is, well, what happened if you lost the files on your computer? Think of this. Who's lost their phone before, or something happened to their phone and it got wiped, right? If you're a mama, the first thing you worried about were all those pictures that you had of them babies on there. If you weren't a mama, the next thing you worried about is, how am I going to get all of my contacts back? Well, it was no different with this host file on our regular computers. Right? As things got bigger and bigger and bigger, there's millions of websites out there, right? The host file, we quickly learned it wasn't going to scale. That's when DNS, the domain name service, was actually created. Okay? When you get on the internet, you think it's all names, but it's not really. So everybody in this class, when we go to park.edu and we log into Canvas, we don't type a number, we type park.edu, right? We log in, we go to Canvas. Well, what's happening is DNS, you're actually sending that park.edu name to DNS. DNS was returning that number for your browser, for your email, doesn't matter what you're using. It's actually doing it for you, and you can't even see it. And that doesn't matter if you're using browsers. It doesn't matter if you're using emails. It doesn't matter if you're on Amazon, you're on Walmart, you're streaming Hulu, you're streaming Netflix. You're doing your banking, paying them bills. DNS is what's actually doing all of the 411 for you. Now, funny enough, nobody actually notices it until it breaks. The reason for most internet outages are not actual outages. They're DNS outages. In other words, the DNS servers that you're using to resolve those names stops functioning. The internet's not out. The internet's not down. The internet doesn't go down. Okay? Maybe pieces of it, your house could go down, but the internet doesn't go down. Typically, when that happens, there's a DNS outage, and that's how heavily we rely on DNS, is because it's what's giving us access to the entire internet without having to remember any numbers. I doubt anybody's ever gone to 209.151.74.236 and thought, okay, finally I can log in. No, you went to a name. Okay. So that's the secret of the DNS, is it didn't solve a technical problem, right? It didn't change anything technically. What it did is it solved a human problem and allowed us to start using names that we can recognize, that we can remember, instead of these ridiculously long numbers. By the way, if anybody wants to know, for all the IP addresses, there's 4 billion of them. Nobody's going to remember 4 billion names or 4 billion addresses, but you'll certainly remember 100 names, and you won't remember 1 or 2 addresses. That is the solving of a human problem. Without that, the internet is nowhere near where it is today. The DNS is translating those names to numbers. It is the internet's 411. It is just like the phone contacts in your phone, but it's global. And it is the secret behind the success of the internet. I'm Todd Simmons. Talk to y'all later, nerds.